Hey, everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, the world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe. You get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talked to the one and only Leigh Mulholland. She has a really interesting background as a CPA, which I love because I am a CPA. Really interesting background in finance, into strategy, into running a compliance program in the energy sector. So she has a lot of great background. She has a lot of great frameworks that she puts into practice, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Take care.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hi, Nick.
Hey, Leigh, what's happening?
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I've been excited to get you on here.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited too. I'm sorry we had to postpone it a couple of times.
You know what? Those are always the best episodes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is that the case?
It's just the anticipation, I think.
Oh, really? Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I never
No
thought
pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Okay. Okay. This is my first time doing something like this. So,
well,
yeah.
You're in good hands.
Yeah, well, I don't doubt that at all. Yeah. I don't know if I remember, we were supposed to be in a podcast room. I don't know if I remember telling you that in February when you and I got together, but
that's right.
But the sound system broke. And so I'm actually in my office. So hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, this sounds perfect.
Okay, good.
Very good. So I've been excited to get you on it. We can just kind of dive right in. I'd love to kind of get started with you journeyed through different roles in energy and finance. And how has that shaped your approach to these regulatory challenges? Like, you have this really interesting background. Maybe we should start with that. Let's talk a little bit about your background, because I think there's some really interesting experiences you had that really have kind of contributed to your viewpoint and your perspective on building programs and, executing compliance.
Yeah. Well, I'll do a little bit of a summary. I started work in the investment management industry when I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a highly regulated industry, and you're managing money for other people, and you're managing money for pension plans and endowments, foundations. And so I think that probably provided a pretty good foundation on the importance of that fiduciary role, in compliance and making sure that you had the accurate information you're giving to your clients and whatnot. And so, I had some pretty good introduction about being detail oriented, when I first started. And so I think that has helped kind of with being able to kind of look at something and hone in on the importance of some regulatory requirements as I kind of worked through things. I joined a company called Epcor, which is a Canadian-based electric power. Actually, it was a utility company at the time. We were living in the Chicago area, and after working in the investment management industry for 10 years, I transitioned to the utility business and started in a finance capacity with the company. And I think I kind of went from one regulatory, one set of regulations to the energy sector, which is a highly regulated industry. And so just made that transition and have been working in that business for about 18 years now. So, yeah.
So you were doing finance stuff. How did you pivot into the compliance stuff?
I transitioned. I was offered a job to move to Canada about 12 years ago now, and completely moved out of finance. So I worked in kind of a traditional accounting field, and then valuation. I did valuation work for the Canadian energy company, and then they offered me a job to manage their strategy and their Alberta commercial management team, and that provided me. We moved to Canada in 2012, wow. And so when I worked in that area for about 3 years, and our compliance officer at the Canadian-based company was retiring, and they offered me an opportunity to move into his position. And so it was a great opportunity to kind of marry the finance, which is I have a CPA, so you have some very, it's very structured. You have your regulations into kind of managing all the compliance requirements for the company, and that's kind of how I made that move. And that was in 2015, so it was about 9.5 years ago.
Wow.
And I loved it. I mean, I really loved it. We were expanding the company at the time. And so we were in 3 different regulatory markets in Canada and 1 in the United States. And then over that 8-year period, we expanded to, I'm going to forget this now, but I think 9 total markets. So 5 in the US and 4 in the Canada.
Wow. So that's a
Yeah.
time of a lot of change. What do you think leadership saw in you and they said she would be perfect for this chief compliance role?
Probably that I had that finance background. I think that was something that the chief legal officer probably was looking for, was somebody that could step into that role. I'm American but was living in Canada, so I probably had a pretty good sense of the U.S. based regulatory requirements, and that probably was part of what drove her to ask me to move in the position. And so I just kind of really embraced it and kind of fell right into it. I think with the investment management background, that helped me work with the team to create a charter and to kind of scale the compliance program as the company grew. And you use some of those skills are very transferable between finance and accounting, and then to manage a compliance function for the company.
How did that investment management experience help you do that? Like, what was it about that experience that helped you like scale the program more quickly?
Well, I mean, so I worked for a company called PIMCO. I don't know if you've heard of, a Pacific Investment Management Company. When I started at PIMCO, I think I was like the 200th employee that they had hired.
Wow.
And we had 75 billion in assets under management, maybe 50 to 75 billion. And so over the several years that I was there, it just multiplied. And so you had to kind of start to use your skill set, the technology that you had at the time, because they weren't going to be adding any people. And so let's figure out how we can grow the company, grow the operations department, grow the reporting, the client reporting. And I think when you see something like that and you're part of that, when you're in your 20s, you take that skill. Totally. And no matter what company you go to, you're able to sort of take on more responsibilities and figure out what can you do with the resources you have to make sure that you can scale your program.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting what you just said, because I think that's right. I think those first roles we have when we're so impressionable can really have a big impact on like the perspective we carry with us, somewhere else, like you having that experience in your 20s, working at PIMCO, which I'm sure was really interesting, seeing all that scaling and building that skill. I mean, that then becomes like a base kind of foundational element of your skill set that, to your point, is transferable across a bunch of different companies and situations and challenges and stuff like that.
I look back on that experience, and the experiences I've had since then have been wonderful. But I think that did help me really kind of frame my career so far. Totally. And we had a very gifted chief operations officer at PIMCO, and he recognized things in certain people, and he would say, hey, you know what, you're doing this job, but hey, Leigh, we'd like for you to try this, but you're keeping your old job, and I was always like, okay, I'll try new things. I was 25 and very impressionable, and and that made me, I think that had like a confidence building in me. So I thought, oh, I could try new things, and that experience, I think, with being, not every experience I was provided was the best. I didn't do the best, but you learn like what you're good at and what maybe you're not so talented at. And it provides the confidence to just accept new roles.
Yeah. And sometimes you like surprise yourself.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. You do surprise yourself. You can do a lot more, than you think you can. So yeah, that's kind of a little history, long-winded history.
So I'm a CPA and I love talking to CPAs in this space. Cause it's not like most compliance folks are CPAs,
Yeah. No,
I'd love to talk a little bit about how you've seen your CPA background, your finance background really help, unlock some impact in the compliance role.
Probably my cost benefit analysis and your ability to look at investments. That the traditional accounting experience I've had was probably 2 years of a 28-year career. I mostly have done financial analytics and valuation prior to moving to Canada to take on that strategy position. So I would say definitely always thinking about the investments the company is going to be making and how can you incorporate your compliance function into that, or your requirements into that. But thinking about it from a cost benefit analysis, I think has really helped me to be able to manage a compliance and keep the team fairly lean, too. And always thinking ahead about, innovative ways to do that also. So I think that has helped.
Do you find that posture, I mean, that's really just like a posture. It's like a way that you look at the world. It's like, it's an instinctive way that you seem to look at things. Do you find that has given you some more credibility with leadership, or that's allowed you to interact with the business in a more kind of constructive way?
Well, I think so. I think also the strategy position, when I had kind of that truly that frontline business, kind of function at the company, and also in business planning. And so you're not afraid to ask to have a seat at the table, when major decisions are being made. It also, I think, has allowed you to kind of stay one step ahead in monitoring, for certain regulations and following the regulatory landscape also. So I think that has helped as well. All of that, those experience helped with that.
I'd love to dive into that strategy experience, because that's pretty unique for a compliance leader to have had that. So first of all, like, what was the role, and like, what gave you the confidence to jump from, financial analytics type of a role into this more strategy role?
So at the time, this was, well, gosh, it's now 13 years ago. I was managing a valuations team for the company that I was with. And so,
what were you evaluating? Or
power plants. Yeah, power plants. So the company was on a pretty aggressive strategy to buy power plants across the North America, and to grow the megawatts that we had at that time. And so I was managing the team that would look at power plants. We would value them and make sure that they fell within the investment criteria for the company that I was working for. And so,
and I'm just super curious about this. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
but
no.
How would you, like, what are you looking at there? You said it's kind of a megawatts thing, and you're kind of trying to figure out. I'm going to sound like an idiot here, but you're trying to figure out, is this investment going to give us, a
certain rate of return, over the life of, the asset and whatnot. So
but how do you value a power plant?
You build a valuation model, and you project out for the number of years that you may hold on to that asset. Every company has a different investment criteria, but you look out, you project all your cash flows, so all the revenues coming in, all the expenses coming out, all of the capital expenses, so your major outages and your minor outages and your inspection will be coming out, and you net all of that together, and you get a rate of return on that. And so if it helps fit within what the investment criteria that the board has put forward, then you may decide to do a full due diligence on a project.
Gotcha.
And that allows you to, sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I think we have a little lag, but it's, you would do that kind of as a first pass, and then they would say, okay, well, this is one that's like worth double clicking on, and maybe we should pursue this a little bit more or something.
That's right. Yeah. So you would look at it and look at a number of projects, and not all projects fit the company's, criteria. And so, we may look at, 10 projects, and maybe one you would do full due diligence on, because you're using the company's money. Due diligence costs quite a bit of money. So
yeah, totally.
So I was managing the team that did that. We also valued some larger capital projects. So if a company wanted to expand, or do that, or if a site wanted to expand or add some additional megawatts, we would take a look at those. That return on that too. So
it sounds like, given that this business had a major strategy the major strategy in growing the business was through this acquisition, your experience in this valuation group really fed and was like a great foundation for that strategy role.
Right. At that time, it was very good. And also the company I was with, they used that as a development opportunity for people. And it was really a good opportunity for people that, that they wanted to get more experience in the business and do more of a broad range look at the company and the future of the company. And so usually people were in that role for about 2 to 3 years, and then you'd move on and do something different. So it sounds like that was a really cool role. Like, what was surprising about that role? Like, what do you still reflect on or still carry with you from that role? Is it a perspective? It's a skill set? It's an interaction or something like that? Like, how has that influenced and, made you a better compliance person today? I would say that when you go and you work, as you know, if you're with a CPA background, you may be working on a project, or you may be working on a piece of a financial statement, you
Mm-hmm.
know, so I would say my experience had always been kind of more microeconomic, to kind of use that. When
Yeah.
you work in a strategy area, that was my first experience looking at a more the macro, perspective of a company. So
Was that
you're
hard?
looking, the first year it was. I would say the first year I was like, this is really a growth opportunity, but it's a pretty big growth opportunity, for me. And so, I also manage the commercial management team, and the real-time operations team in Canada as well. So I had
Wow.
two or three, and then I think I was in charge of the due diligence for the valuation um, responsibilities too. So it was a pretty big job. And that was my first foray into kind of looking at things from a more corporate perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at things for the planning of the company for 5 to 10 years down the road. And so that did help with looking at putting together and managing the compliance function of the company, especially as the company was growing, between 2015 and 2023 when I left.
Yeah.
So yeah, because
Yeah.
you can kind of hone in on the markets with the most risk. You can kind of start to look at things from truly a risk perspective. Risk and enterprise risk. You know that kind of feeds into some of the strategic direction that you may be taking.
Totally. Yeah.
And
And
so it's yeah,
it probably gave you a lot of exposure to your point, different parts of the business and different lenses you
yes,
need to look at the business
yeah,
through in order to be
yeah.
effective,
Yeah, and then I had the background in understanding the different, the breakdown of the operations,
Yeah.
the money behind that too. And so I think that helped. That has helped as well. I'm sensitive to that. I'm sensitive to budget
Yeah.
implications, as a result.
Yeah. And I think those kind of experiences really can affect your instincts.
It can, yes, you're right. You're very right about that. You can kind of hone in on, bringing it back to regulatory compliance. You can kind of hone in on exactly the compliance risks that the company may have, and I think that helped, us and building the program as the company grew.
Um, I'm like obsessed with materiality, especially in this space.
Uh-huh.
As accountants, we learn about materiality. It seems like day one. I think it's like one of the foundational principles of, accounting. And what I find is that in our space, that's like a skill that's kind of lacking. And I talk about this a lot that, expertise in any field is knowing what matters and what doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a doctor that just got out of residency. He's probably going to ask you 1,000 questions, a whole register of questions, versus the doctor that's been around for 30 years. He's going to ask you 5 or 6 questions because he can really zoom in on what the issue is a lot faster. Have you seen that as you've kind of run different teams? Have you seen this sort of struggle that some folks have with materiality really cause them to like not get the traction they want with the business or raise issues that really aren't needle movers? And if you have, how have you helped your teams to like really dial in on that materiality thing so you're not wasting cycles and wasting effort on things that aren't, that don't matter. You know what I mean?
So I would say, I think a lot of compliance teams, just in talking to people, I think that they perhaps, I don't want to say that all compliance officers do this, but perhaps there are some that their compliance program just becomes cumulative.
Yeah,
And
right.
so, the regulations change, and when regulations change, you've got to look to see how are we operating from an efficiency perspective and effective. Is our compliance program effective? Is it efficient? What can come off the plate? We need to make sure that we always look at kind of what I would say the table stakes. So,
Mm-hmm.
you have a compliance program that is table stakes, and those are just the items you've got to do every year. You know that you've got to do reporting. You have to do training. What's your communication program? But we're going through the process here. I've just been at this new job for about 8 months now, and we're going through the process here, really looking at how we're working and what we're doing to make sure that we are always can be spending our time working with the frontline business groups, working with the operations teams, working with the legal group, and working with your other partner areas to make sure that they know that we're keeping ahead of what's coming down the pipeline and providing the support we need. And so I think that's probably one of the most important things to do, is to make sure you're looking at what you're doing and why you're doing it, and focusing on the right things. So
yeah, and just kind of having that beginner's eye, that like ability to come in and look at something fresh. There's a lot of value in that, to your point, to kind of question the response of like, well, we've always done it this way. That's not usually the right answer, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, it's not the right answer, because there's too many other things we need to be working on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the one thing I get very frustrated about is when we're doing and when we're spending our time on things that just provide for inefficiencies. And
Yeah.
I think when you focus on the right areas and you can articulate that with the business units you're supporting, then you get that respect from them.
I think that's right. Yeah, because you're kind of showing up as a business person, and they view themselves as a business person, not as, you're not showing up as some other animal or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So I really want to dive into your new role, because I think it's a really cool role, but I want to zoom back a little bit. Like, what drew you to energy, and what keeps you so engaged in this dynamic industry?
Well, that question was on your list that Tara sent, and I was so happy, because I thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting story. We had just had a baby. I'll bring it, but it's a personal direction. And I was working full time, and I had a commute, and this was before the financial crisis. And so I got a call from a recruiter that I had worked with before, and he said, "Hey, there's a job opportunity, and it's 2 miles from your home." And so I thought, I think I'm interested in at least going in and talking to them about that. And that's how I was hired into the electric power sector, the utility business. And so, yeah.
But you stayed. You've loved it.
Yeah. You know what? And I often look back, because I did enjoy working in the investment management business, but I really love the economics of the electric sector and the utility business. It's very supply demand. And it's always ever changing, and it's it's a complicated business, so I think it took a few years to kind of fully understand the business. And I've stayed. Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's a critical infrastructure. It keeps us all, the lights on and people safe, and
Netflix running.
And Netflix running, the heaters on, the air conditioner on. So I just really have found my place, and the people that work in the utility business are fabulous people. I mean, it's a great culture, to be a part of. Isn't it
interesting that it seems like highly regulated industries attract great people?
Yeah, because you're here to work. We're here to keep people's lights on. We're here to make sure that you have clean and wonderful water to drink. And so, it's when you have that, if that's your focus of your business, it just, I think, attracts people, that are just good people. And that's the common goal. It's really it's super important.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of opportunity to kind of organize everybody around that North Star. Like, there's a certain purity to the North Star that you just talked about. It's like it's service to others, and there's a similar thing kind of in healthcare. So let's dive into your new role. So tell me about the new role. How did you know it was time to jump to this new opportunity? What was it that was so attractive about it for you?
So I have been here since August. I'm the compliance officer for Kansas City Board of Public Utilities. We are a municipally owned public power, public water, company, public utility company. And I'm from the U.S. originally, and it felt like it was time to come back to the United States. And so started looking and really liked, was very familiar with the Kansas City area. And made the move and moved back over the last summer. So, yeah, and it's been a great opportunity to have a great team. There's 12 of us here that manage the compliance for the whole company. It's predominantly regulatory compliance, but I also have internal audit, and then the insurance, and then the enterprise risk management. Wow. And so it was a great opportunity. I report to the general manager, so the CEO. So he's, responsible for all the main areas. So I'm on the executive team, and it was just a great opportunity.
What's been surprising about the transition?
So I was with a company called Capital Power, Canadian-based independent power producer. So I have never worked for a public utility company before. Although I would say, like, one of your questions was the regulatory requirements. How do you manage those? Are there different?
Yeah.
I would say that the biggest change that I've noticed is really the governance structure of the company here. So we are. Our board are publicly elected officials. So our board meetings are conducted in an open format. So that's different for me. Whereas my former company is a publicly traded company. So we had a board that, very, very much more of a different corporate structure. So the governance structure has been different. So that's been a learning experience for me. But it's now I'm used to it. I go to all the board meetings. So a lot of contact with the board, which has been great. And we actually have a fairly new leadership team here. The general manager who hired me, had planned to retire, so he retired in December. I think his last day was the very end of December, and so I have a new manager. But he was the COO at the time, so that's been fun to be part of a new leadership team and to help the company continue to grow. And so that's just been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Did you have much interaction with that COO prior to him ascending to CEO?
I did, yes. So he reported to the general manager as I did. So, and he had been the CEO for a number of years. And so, yeah, so I was hired in, he was a peer, and then he applied for the position and got it. And so, yeah, so we've got a new leadership team and a new CFO also. So it's been fun.
That sounds fun. I have one quick question about the board. Like, what is the dynamic with like elected officials on the board versus, officers on a public company board?
I think they both
vibe or what?
No, I would say that have both sets have fiduciary responsibility over the company. It's just you're getting onto the board in a different way. You actually have to go and you are an elected official, so you have a campaign. I haven't been here when one of those have occurred. I think we have one this coming fall. Okay. And so I haven't seen how that actually is run. So I think you still have the president or the chair of the board, and they have a term that they are in. You have a vice chair of a board, just like you would at a private company. So you have committees. There's an audit committee, there's a finance committee, there's a policy committee, and so we have committees too. So it's just how you get onto the board is a different process.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's like a horse and a zebra. They're kind of the same.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
So you stepped into a program that existed. There's 12 people there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what did you bring to the program? Like, how did your approach to designing compliance program that fits the unique needs of that organization like manifest itself in this role versus what you built at the last place?
So we are in the process of consolidating all of our compliance programs. So I would say compliance program management overall is something that, which I guess is probably more administrative, but we've had compliance programs on the regulatory side, on the water side, on the air side, and we're going to be combining all of those into one corporate compliance program. I want the teams to be working more together. And so we're going to be integrating that this year. We also relooked at the enterprise risk management program at the end of last year, and we'll be developing a more comprehensive compliance risk management program this year, which kind of will feed into your enterprise risk management process. So we'll be doing a more administrative kind of changes to the program this year than probably they're used to. I also have taken we kind of, well, as you mentioned, when you started a company, you have fresh eyes, you're looking at kind of how people are working, what they're working on. We've, probably will be restructuring the program a little bit this year and folding in to the compliance program those table stakes, roles, so that we can actually draw out more of the monitoring and the policy work. More so in 2025. So kind of looking at it and restructuring, and then looking at those inefficiencies, and what are we doing? Do we really need to be doing this, or can we, what are the budget implications and
Right.
things like that? Yeah.
So did you naturally just kind of see a bunch of like, I don't want to call them red flags, because that's kind of dramatic, but you stepped into it and you see all this different sort of compliance work going on and all these disparate functions and stuff like that. Was your gut just to say like, okay, well, this is clearly duplicative. There's clearly inefficiency in this and we need to kind of consolidate it? Was that kind of the...
No, I would say more that maybe this is more of a philosophical. I think if you have a compliance officer, you've got one leader of the company, you're managing, as you know, it's a very broad position. Yeah. You need to make sure that everybody on your team understands what they're all working on. Yeah, and so I wouldn't say that the what people are doing was disparate. It wasn't disparate. It's just that everybody who works under me needs to understand what role they have to play in the area of what our compliance obligations are, what are our compliance program obligations, and what are people working. So it's really just an opportunity for us to kind of build a corporate compliance program, as opposed to having an air, environmental, a water program, and then the electric power, the regulatory program. So we're going to be, you will have that, but let's look at it from the whole perspective of what are all of our reporting obligations, what are all of our training obligations, and then there have been some activities that have come up along the way as I've gotten more into the role, that where we have to kind of look at those activities and see if they still make sense, So, and I think we'll probably be uncovering more of those as we get more involved in this. Yeah. So
have you faced any resistance?
Not from my team so far. No.
How about from the business? Nothing?
Not so far. I mean, not so far. So in fact, I mean, I would say people have been very supportive, since I joined the company, and have given their support on some of the changes that we want to make, and it's been great so far.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about like the intentionality that you show up with, right? Like on day one, you're in a new role, you just got this job, you're moving down to Kansas City. Talk to me about like your mindset and your like intentionality on how you wanted to show up and how you wanted to like build your brand within the company based on maybe lessons you learned at your last roles.
Yeah, my first day, I think, was August, the very end of August. I would say I like to ease into positions. I like to come in, and especially on a compliance program and a mature compliance program, you don't want to make changes right away. I kind of came in and started at a good time, because the week later we were working on the budget.
Okay.
So then you have to understand kind of what the team's roles and responsibilities are, to put forward your team's budget to the board. So kind of got a deep dive on that, and really to make sure that they had confidence in my understanding about what we were putting forward on with the budget, and then also when you start a new job, where you have your internal audit plan and you've got your enterprise risk program that you've got to review, you sort of have to start right in looking at that and figuring out what is best for the business to concentrate on for the next year or two in terms of enterprise risk and internal audit. And so I really try to have some outreach to some of the senior leaders at the company, to get their input on, the risks that they're seeing in their own business unit, if at all, to make sure that we took that into consideration on the internal audit plan and the enterprise risk side. And that was really the first, I would say, 4 to 5 months was really kind of building out those two programs and getting to know the team.
So that's a smart approach. I mean, it's kind of lucky you came in right at budget time, and it's pretty smart that you took that approach of like, reaching out to these other leaders and getting their perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to. Yeah.
I agree.
Because it's important, when you work in compliance to be a partner, with the groups that you're supporting. And so I wanted them to know that I was a person they could come to also, and to feel comfortable about that. And being new, it's just always, I think, better to work together.
Totally.
Yeah.
In our pre-call, you mentioned that if people know who you are, they're more likely to come to you. Talk a little bit about how you use this strategy to build some of that trust that I'm sure is kind of paying dividends for you now.
So again, making sure that you had the right introductions. When I first started at the company a number of months ago, having outreach, stopping off to see people, going to the plant. I try to get to the plant. I haven't been able to get to the plant as much as I would like to, the water plant and our power plant, but making sure that people know to come to you and what your role is, and that you have an open door policy has been really important.
So, I mean, part of it, part of what you described about going to those leaders, I think is very, it's strategic. I think when somebody new comes into a company and they don't take that approach, they end up getting perceived potentially as like kind of a know-it-all. And it's like, how do you know anything? You're new here, So I think that's, it's smart strategically to come and, build that relationship and get their perspective, but it also probably helps you get smarter on the business faster, right? Because there's probably assumptions you had that maybe weren't confirmed or whatever,
Well, yeah, and I, in looking at what my predecessor did, he laid out a very good foundation on the enterprise risk program also, and so just taking at that, reviewing it, looking at the risk register, and I made some tweaks to it, but I did that working in partnership with all of our senior leaders, and so we got together to build out what our enterprise risk, program would be for this year, and so I think that helped, let them get to know me better, and me get to know their areas better and them better, and kind of hone in on what their biggest concerns were.
And doing that also sets a pretty good example to your team on how compliance should show up to the business, to your point, to be a partner with the business, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, my group that works for me are all great. I would say, we've got, our compliance teams are actually in electric operations. They're with the water engineering group. And so I've got a group here that works with me in my area here that frequently are out with our operations team. So it's been a really good learning experience for me too, to see how they manage, that relationship building and that partnership.
So what would you, if you were to give some advice to a compliance officer who didn't have your experience, and maybe hasn't built a program for the first time, what advice would you give them about fostering this culture of open communication and showing up as a true partner to the business?
I think it's important to follow up is really important. I think setting up some time and meeting with the senior leaders at the company you're with, right when you're first moving into a compliance officer position, is very important to get their perspective on what makes them nervous or any concerns that they have. And then they will open doors for you, asking the question, who else can I talk to in your group that would be a really good partner for me to work with? And they will open those doors for you, certainly. So I think that's really important. Understanding some of the compliance frameworks. So if you look at the Department of Justice and their periodic updates on what they want to see in an effective compliance program, and making sure that your compliance program kind of follows those guidelines, or any industry guidelines would be important also. Like, take a look at that and see how you can scale that to your program would be very important. And then just being transparent and open and having a good line of reporting and communication with the company. Putting out, I would say it's very important to visit certain departments, certain sites, and let people meet you. When I was at my former company, I at least once a year, this is pre-COVID, but I try to go out to each of our operating sites once a year and spend a day or two so that people could get to know me. And if they had concerns or questions, they would feel more comfortable reaching out to the compliance team. And I think that helped, build that partnership. And so that I think I mentioned to you as boots on the ground. I think it's important to have boots on the ground if you manage a compliance function at your company. So that's important. Those are three main things I would say for any new compliance officer that they should embrace.
Well, that last one is really, it really helps to humanize the program,
Yeah, I think so.
It moves from this scary thing, compliance, to, oh, this is a human being who I connected with, and they clearly want to help me. And you know what I'm saying? It breaks down some walls, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I wanted people to be able to come to, anyone on my team or to me personally. And I always will want people to feel comfortable doing that. Because if you have a concern about, hey, I think we're out of compliance, you want people to come and talk to you about that. So you can rule that out, or you can say, oh, I think this is something we need to get together with our regulator and talk about. So I think that's important for fostering that.
Has this boots on the ground approach, is this like a new term for your team?
I don't know if I've ever used it with them. I don't know if I've ever used that with them.
But the philosophy
I've
manifests itself in the way that you do business, how has that influenced your team, do you think? Do you think that they've started to see that kind of boots on the ground?
I think my current team has boots on the ground.
They're already that way.
They are very much so integrated with the teams that they support. So it's really great to see that. When you work at a company that's more localized too, I think that naturally happens. Yeah.
Okay. And that makes sense, because you're all Kansas City based type.
Yeah. So if you work kind of in a centralized corporate compliance team, you have to really work on that outreach. I think that my team has worked on that outreach here, for sure. I think, like with any compliance function, we're a fairly new profession, and so, right. When you think about people that have worked in compliance for over 10 years, you've seen a change in that partnership and the importance of, I think what I've noticed here too is that there's a very strong culture of compliance also. And that may have been different 10 years ago. I don't know that, but I think that has, I think the profession has changed and people see it more of a partner now than maybe certainly 2 decades ago. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I just want us to keep pushing that forward, because there's still a lot of groups that feel like everyone else thinks of them as that anti-business function, and it doesn't have to be that way. You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. And I mean, there's probably some people who, I remember going to a site one time, like, oh my gosh, the compliance officer's here. What are we going to do? The sky's falling. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm just here visiting to make sure that people, to do ethics training, and so that you guys know if you report something, that it goes to someone in my group, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, if you're not out there, if you're not on the front lines, then people are going to come up with their own ideas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Do you have a good example of how, like, understanding, you had this access to the operational side, you had access to strategy, you got to zoom out from the micro to the macro and get that sort of vantage point. Can you share an example, either at your last role or in this role, of like how understanding the operational side of the business helped you implement a more effective compliance strategy, or to drive some change, or to frame out, a compliance initiative in a way that would resonate with the stakeholder who you're trying to influence?
Well, the industry is undergoing quite a bit of rapid change, especially on the power side. And so, and some of that's due to demand increases. Some of that is due to weather changes. And so with that comes, new regulatory requirements. And so I don't know if I was living in Canada at the time, but we had just bought a wind asset in Texas. So I don't know if you remember Winter Storm Uri and Winter Storm Elliott I think that was 2021 and 2022. Well, with that came new requirements to not necessarily harden your asset, but to make sure that you could operate under extreme weather conditions,
like more resilient grid or something.
Yeah, making sure that your asset can operate during extreme cold temperatures, essentially. Okay. And so just understanding kind of the power sector has very long lead times, and so implementing a program like that and making sure that you were doing it in an efficient way, an effective way, and communicating that to the operations teams so that they could build out their own winter preparedness plan is very important. Right. You have to do that together. And so, and your operations team wants to understand how to implement those regulatory changes and do it in a cost-effective manner. And so, getting out ahead of that and understanding that, and bringing that back to your operations is going to benefit your bottom line. So understanding all that's really important.
Yeah, and again, back to the instincts with those past experiences. That's probably just naturally ingrained in your communication and the way that you interact with the business.
Yeah, I try for it to be. I think when you've got, if you go back to your compliance program and making sure that your table stakes are covered, when it allows you to spend more time on what's coming down the pipeline and making sure that you have the right planning and that you can socialize that with the teams, that you're supporting too, because that's very important. You can get them ready for what's coming down the pipeline. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of these rapid changes going on. Like there's a lot of potential changes at the EPA and other, regulations and other regulatory bodies with this new administration. Mm-hmm. How are you kind of adapting to that? How are you helping your business see around the curve? And what is like the general kind of like tenor in your industry right now with respect to this? So a corollary is that, the executive order about the FCPA went out, and in general compliance, particularly, companies with international operations compliance teams are in a little bit of a panic. Mm-hmm. Will we be around? Are we getting deleted? I think it's a little bit overblown, but is there a similar thing happening in your space? And how do you help see around the curve in that respect?
Well, you have to do a lot of monitoring, and make sure that you keep up with the direction that your primary regulators are going. And so you mentioned the EPA. So on March the 12th, Leigh Zeldin announced a number of announcements where they're going to be looking at some of the regulations that would have been impactful to us. And so we have chosen to slow down on implementing or doing some additional scenario testing on a few of the areas, and so it's really monitoring. It's not going to take any work away.
Yeah, right.
We've still got a lot of work to do. So, but it is going to, I think, allow us to kind of sit back and say, let's look at this. In fact, we just had a meeting this week with one of our consultants who's working on an environmental project with us on some regulations that would have been if we had a Democrat, if we had a different administration, we would have been implementing that this in the next couple of years. And we're like, well, we're just going to do a 60-day pause. We'll get back to you over the summer and decide if we need to resurrect that project again, or the direction that we're going to take on that project. And so the monitoring is very, very, very important. And I do read a lot, about the environmental, especially the environmental side. On the reliability side, those regulations I think will be moving forward. Those are new regulations like the cold weather standards, that we will be moving forward on the cybersecurity regulations and things like that. I don't see any change in that area. But on the environmental side, we're kind of in a wait and see, right now.
How much of the power that the Canadian company you were with was like piped down to the United States? Is that a stupid question?
Well,
I have no idea how power works. So
we did sell power across the border. You have inter-ties between the U.S. and Canada, and so there was electricity that was traded down into the United States. Yeah.
So when you read in the headlines about all these tariffs and all this back and forth, do you think it's a little bit overblown with respect to the energy side, or do you feel like that's like a massive issue?
I don't know if it's a massive issue. I think would hit more of the electricity that's probably coming from Toronto, like the Ontario area. And I just don't know if I'm well versed on how that would.
Gotcha.
Yeah, as much as I probably should be.
It's kind of an interesting question, though. I mean, the whole thing is so interesting. Just the fact that we can outsource or just like sell power across borders is just in itself kind of interesting, Well,
it keeps the reliability. Makes sure that you've got you're meeting some of your supply and demand, needs.
All right, so we're getting to the end here, Leigh. Okay. This was phenomenal. Who knew this was your first one? You're a natural.
Oh. I don't know. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And
absolutely. I got one last question for you, though.
Okay.
So if you can go back in time, my favorite question, if you can go back in time and find a young Leigh What piece of advice do you wish you could give her? What piece of advice do you wish you had earlier?
What piece of advice do I think I would say don't ever be fearful of trying new things. And I think I was always a little bit, I think I mentioned earlier, I like to try new things and that was great, but I was also a little apprehensive, about that. I would say communication skills are super, super important. Yeah.
You've probably always been a pretty good communicator though, huh?
I wish I would have done a little bit more like public speaking when I was younger, as opposed to I waited, I think a little bit. And I've done conferences and things like that. I would say outreach, industry experience, getting involved with leadership role, not just through your company, but through your community. Probably wish I would have done a little bit more of that when I was in my 20s. I think that's really great. Getting on a nonprofit board and doing volunteer work. I wish I would have done that when I was a little bit younger. I started that probably in my 40s. And so I think all those things make a very well-rounded person in the workplace and personal life too. So,
well, and just really as you've talked about your experience, your well-roundedness is like very apparent. You've had these really interesting experiences, these interesting, jobs, and it's cool when you can look back on all that and say, oh my gosh, that all kind of makes sense how this fits together. And, now I can show up in a new way.
Yeah, I try. And thinking about other people, thinking that's very important too.
Yeah.
Always placing other people first, I think is very important.
Well, and then, again, if you don't have that kind of mindset, how can you ever be a true partner,
Yeah, that's true. You have to be a good listener.
Yeah.
To be a good partner. Yeah.
Well, Leigh, thank you so much for joining us. This was so fun.
Thank you.
Love to have you back. Maybe
I would love that.
Webinar or something together. Where can people find you if they have any questions?
lmulholland@bpu.com is my work email address. Yeah.
Very
so they
good.
can reach me at Board of Public Utilities.
Thank you so much, Leigh.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Thank you for having me. Okay.
Bye.
Take care.